Agent Morris with the NSA.
We have identified some very, very interesting anomalous type of aircraft.
Traffic is quite luminous and is exhibiting some non-ballistic motion. Over.
Move very rapidly at any speed or whether any direction it wanted to go. Why it could change and go to the right or the left or go crossways without hesitating a bit.
What do you think it was?
Well, if they call it a flying saucer, that's what it is.
EWA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over. Negative. We don't want to report.
Look, it wasn't my worst Wednesday night.
Good evening, everybody. This is Smiles Lewis. Welcome to another live edition of Anomaly Now, straight out of Austin, Texas. This is the weekly live media news roundup for the 501c3 nonprofit Scientific Anomaly Institute. And you know what? We are having technical difficulties. That's right, folks. Cameras, browsers, operating systems don't always cooperate. That's okay. You don't need to see my ugly mug. Well, it's yet another anniversary of September 11th, 2001 and the terror attacks. And so this time of year and for other reasons, always kind of get me down. Like a lot of people, I'm blessed to say that I wasn't so negatively affected by the terror attacks as thousands of others, millions were in the wake of those things. But yeah, we'll get to all that. We'll get to all that in just a minute. But thank you for joining us. Like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell, all that good stuff. That does help with the YouTube algorithms and whatnot. I haven't really spoken about this, but as with so many channels that deal with controversial subjects, we have had our fair share of fun dealing with the YouTube overlord. And we've had videos deleted in the past, and most recently they deleted yet another one. But this time, as I got totally irreverent in my appeal to them and saying, I know this isn't going to help, but here's, why this is wrong. They actually reinstated the video. Woohoo! Yay, small victories, such as they are. Well, I'd like to first, of course, remind you that we have a new Patreon, patreon.com, and that's patreon.com/Anomaly Archives. You can go there and you can subscribe for free and get updates about what we're doing, as well as our new monthly online lecture series. I'll be giving a presentation later this month, date to be determined. And then in October, we've got Greg Bishop talking about UFOs and creativity and co-creation. And well, I'm actually not sure exactly what the title of his presentation is, but it's going to be, I believe, Wednesday, October 23rd. And we'll also have Joe Green doing a presentation on conspiracy in November, and Twee Snyder in December talking about airships and the Aurora UFO crash. What didn't really happen. Anyway, so you can also go to our flipboard.com/Anomaly Archives and see information there, including links to some of the things that we'll be talking about. But really, all I really want to talk about is, first and foremost, the passing of James Earl Jones, born January 17th, 1931, who passed on September 9th, 2024, just a few days ago. And, you know, I had just finished reading yesterday when I heard the news. I just finished reading the book I've mentioned before, The Abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, Alien Encounters, Civil Rights, and the New Age in America by author Matthew Bowman. Of course, Mr. Bowman over at X, formerly known as Twitter, the artist formerly known as blah, 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 saying, my favorite James Earl Jones as Barney Hill in the UFO incident. Jones produced and starred in this movie because he saw the story of the first American UFO abduction as a metaphor for race in the U.S. More in my book, movie, in the comments. And in fact, you can watch the whole thing online at YouTube, and we'll provide the link to that. But yeah, over on Wikipedia, there's no mention of that movie. Not that it was his biggest claim to fame, obviously, for me, being 53, growing up as a Gen Xer. Of course. Okay. Well, Victor, remind me later. I'm going to need to reinstate the audio. So yeah, of course, I know James Earl Jones is the voice of Darth Vader in the Star Wars series. And of course, he had a much wider and important career than that. But yeah, a little disappointed to see that there's nothing in his Wikipedia bio about the fact that he produced the UFO incident movie that portrayed the Betty and Barney Hill story. And in fact, I was going to go ahead and just read a couple of bits from that. So from Matthew Bowman's book on the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. In late spring of 1972, James Earl Jones called Betty Hill at her home. At that point, Jones was a well-known actor transitioning from the stage to film. He had won a Tony Award in 1969 and had received an Academy Award nomination in 1971, but was still several years away from providing the voice to Darth Vader in Star Wars. As his Hollywood star was ascending, Jones found that he had the finances and influence to make projects he was interested in. And he remembered reading the condensed version of Fuller's The Interrupted Journey in Look magazine. He called Fuller first, and then Betty Hill. Betty was initially resistant to making a film. Quote, "It is too much responsibility to give to somebody else without any control," she wrote to Stuart Nixon of NICAP after Jones spoke with Fuller and Fuller with her. Quote, "If someone said he would produce it exactly as it happened, I would agree, and that is the only way I would agree," unquote. But after speaking with Jones, she was comforted. Quote, "James Earl Jones called me and we talked for an hour about the way it would be produced," she wrote to Nixon later. She had asked Jones to, quote, "leave the ending open or slanted towards UFOs a little. He is a believer," unquote, she assured Nixon. After her conversation with the actor, she agreed to allow Jones to buy the movie rights. Jones went to New Hampshire, met with Betty, and drove the route the Hills had taken that night through Franconia Notch and past the Indian Head Resort. A little later, James Earl Jones seemed amenable. Quote, "I am convinced that something of the sort really happened," he told the Boston Globe. He cited Betty's map and insisted that not only did he find the story believable, but he also felt it was a compelling narrative. But he selected the story out of the many he could have produced for a specific reason. He told the Los Angeles Times he wanted to keep it, quote, "from falling into the science fiction or horror movie area," unquote. Instead, the movie Jones eventually shepherded into production is, as one critic put it, quote, "more a study of the trauma and the way it preyed on the insecurities of an interracial marriage than as an account of an abduction by spacecraft invaders." It aired on NBC the week before Halloween 1975. Still later, it was not quite the story that Betty Hill wanted to tell. Quote, "The original had much more of the UFO in it," she wrote to Walter Webb. Quote, "I was disappointed that so much was left out." She had read the script and approved it because she thought it introduced UFOs to the general public who had no knowledge of them in a way that they would be believable. But the version that appeared on TV was the story that James Earl Jones wanted to tell. The UFO incident was a trigger for the Hills' deeper anxiety about the pressure of being an interracial couple in 1960s America. In the closing voiceover of the film, Simon declares that whether the abduction was real or fantasized, quote, remains a question. But Betty's last lines are significant. Do you remember when we were in the middle of all that mess? She asks, while the two are happily barbecuing in their yard after Simon's treatment is complete. We were fighting all the time, about everything. But now, she tells her husband, you've given me so much love. The real triumph of the film is not the Hills' recovered memory, it is the preservation of their marriage across the racial divide. And then lastly, Jones downplayed the abduction itself in favor of his invented dramatic arc about the Hills' marriage. Carl Sagan, quite consciously treated the story as a fantasy or fairy tale. Fuller's dispute with Lamb was about the details and presentation of the narrative as a story more than its veracity. More and more, the arguments surrounding Betty Hill and her story were about how it functioned as a story. More and more, they were about its adaptations. Anyway, I do highly recommend the book by Matthew Bowman, Abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. It is not your traditional UFO book. It is not your typical abduction book. If you're looking for tales of what happens in these encounters and post their experience, that's not what's in here. It is a historian's approach to the context in which their experiences emerged. Now, I find it interesting also that having just finished this book that ends, of course, as I was describing, with James Earl Jones paying to produce and star in the production of the Betty and Barney Hill story for its first teleplay. I was just talking with a good friend who graduated from New York's University Film School in 1994, and who reminded me that James Earl Jones spoke at his commencement. And you can find clips of the commencement participants' quotes at the New York Times website. And in fact, I had the quote here that I was going to read. This is, I believe, attributed to James Earl Jones from, I think it says May 12th, 1994. It doesn't matter what path we take. We have to remain curious and fearless. We have to look at the world and question what we see. We have to be unafraid to say no and change what is unacceptable. Each of us has the ability to do this. Each of us has the responsibility to do it. New York University, May 12th, James Earl Jones, actor. Now, this friend also told me that about him having remembered mentioning UFOs in this commencement speech. And what my friend related was the general tone of his speech was bestowing graduates with a sense of responsibility for contributing to cultural and scientific advancement and discovery. And he said something about current areas of research that might uncover mysteries, concluding a series of examples with, quote, how a UFO can turn on a dime, which I distinctly remember because his voice lent the whole proceeding an air of gravitas, and he distinctly pronounced each letter of UFO. And he concluded by wishing us Godspeed. Now, that's just all for a little historic fun. And before I proceed to, let's see what else. Just some random news from the week. A good friend, former co-host, was asking me if I remembered where in a past Magonia issue there had been an article about the Nazi UFO flying saucer mythos. And of course, there's been so much written about that. I did some searches and lo and behold, discovered that just this month, their founder has declared so long and thanks for all the books, sadly. Magonia was started many, many years ago, many decades ago. And in fact, in the other book that I'm reading, Greg Agigian's After the Flying Saucers Came, A Global History of the UFO Phenomena, there's definitely references to the origin story and beginnings of this publication or its predecessor. And over at pelicanist.blogspot.com, one of the many Magonia archive websites, you can read the farewell notice there from John Rimmer. And there's at least, looks like 7 different websites that he has been preserving articles from the old Magonia on. And so the links will be there. This was a very good European magazine on UFOs and all subjects surrounding it. Highly recommend it. The article that my friend was remembering apparently is no longer available. Maybe it is somewhere and we just haven't found it yet. But what he was looking for was this article by another UFO zine author, Kevin McClure. I remember way back in the day, I believe it was Kevin McClure that had a zine called Promises and Disappointments that was specifically about UFOs and the alien abduction phenomena. But apparently he penned this article or tome, The Nazi UFO Mythos, many years ago, and it has been preserved at this other website, which appears to be Spanish or Italian, not sure. Yeah, so we'll have the link to that, and you can read that if you're interested. Of course, there was some other recent Draining the Nazi UFO Swamp article that I came across, but flashing back to recent discussion of academic-oriented UFO UAP conferences, our friend, philosopher Brian Sintis over at skunkworksblog.com has a review, Varieties and Trajectories of Contemporary UAP Studies, Reflections on the Most Recent Society for UAP Studies Annual Conference. Of course, we talked with my good friend Greg Bishop about this a few weeks ago, but here's yet another take on that weekend's multiple day conference proceedings. You can check that out. Also in UFO news, now I do not give this much credence, but there's this video making the rounds, brought to my attention by Coast to Coast AM, of an alleged orb turning into 2 people. But honestly, if you look at this video, the quality of this night vision surveillance camera, whatever it is so bad and has so many artifacts. It really just seems like it's just a bad artifact of like, okay, there's something, either they have a light in their hand or something's glinting off of them. Like it looks like the guy's wristwatch, maybe. I don't know. But in this video, there's something that looks like it's on the wrist of one of these people that's reflecting light, but it's being promoted as if this ball of light that's seen moving across the field morphs into a person, when in fact, if you watch it back, all the different parts of it, it seems clear that just the camera's resolution only resolves the person when they're still and not moving. And when they're still, you can see something reflecting that seems to be the ball of light that is being hey, Chevy, how's it going? That's being recorded on the film. Okay, so let's just, the last haul here is going to be related to, Chevy, get off the screen. September 11th, 9/11. And at some point I'll be mentioning RNGs, random number generators, and their relation to the idea of focused attention and intention or attention, and the seemingly strange psychic ability of masses of focused people to make random number generators less random. What the hell am I talking about? Well, back for many years, for decades now, parapsychology-oriented researchers have been running these random number generators, these electronic coin flippers, around the world, and trying to measure whether or not mass human attention can affect randomness. This goes back to just a series of different parapsychological experiments in the lab. But I think one of the first times I remember hearing about this, of course, was September 11th, but also the death of Princess Diana. And also every year, the same researchers look at this data when it comes to New Year's Eve, and how as New Year's travels around the time zone, there's these peaks, these deviations from randomness. Well, over on Facebook, Brian J. Williams posted, here's the graphical outcome of the combined data from the 5 RNGs, random number generators, actively running in the U.S. during last night's broadcast of the lively presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. 4 of these RNGs were part of the Global Consciousness Project worldwide network, while one of them was running in my home in New Mexico. In line with the prediction made prior to the event, the data exhibit a negative sloping trend throughout the course of the debate broadcast that is marginally significant overall. While this trend does look interesting, we should be careful about trying to read too much meaning into it, since it remains possible that this outcome could have come about by chance, which we should expect to occur from time to time, given the random fluctuations inherent in the noise of RNGs. In order to have better confidence that it might reflect a possible mass group consciousness effect, we need to keep finding a similar kind of trend occurring in RNG data taken across multiple debate events. So let's see what happens with other debates to come. Now, the basic premise here is just that as people, as large groups of people focus their attention on the same event, that somehow this perturbs the physical makeup of reality and causes a randomness to, I believe, decrease. And so here you can see the graphic. Of course, if you're listening to this, you're not going to see it, but we'll provide the link to the Facebook post. But if you just search for Global Consciousness Project RNG, random number generator, you'll find tons of past experiments in this regard. Of course, last night's debate happened on the day before today. That's how time works, right? Or at least our perception of it. And September 10th, yesterday, and then today, September 11th, 2024. So many years and decades after the events of September 11th, 2001, which also saw a deviation of randomness, a deviation from randomness in the hours leading up to the first plane hitting first tower of the World Trade Centers. Now, I will, in the show notes after the show, provide links to a couple of different times in the years past that I've done anniversary issues where I've compiled a lot of the information about my research into the events of September 11th. Sorry, folks, if conspiracy theory bothers you, but I definitely still am a 9/11 truther. That is a skeptic of the official narrative of the events of September 11th. I don't go in for the wilder conspiracy theories. I mostly focus on foreknowledge, the fact that our alphabet agencies, all these military intelligence complex agencies that take our money. Oh, I should start by saying also the views expressed by Miles Lewis today and in the videos I'll be playing shortly do not necessarily reflect those of the Scientific Anomaly Institute, Anomaly Archives, or its board of directors. But back in 2013, I did a pretty comprehensive show on my Anomaly radio network talking about September 11th. And I'll provide a link to that. It was about an hour or so, went into great detail. And then, of course, last year on this show, towards the end of the show, I talked a little bit about that. And that's what comes up this time of year, every year. So I'm leading up to something I'm going to play, but a couple of things I'm going to play. Back in 2006, I reported about the fact that for the first time or second time ever, I recorded an article about the precognitive visions of parapolitical researcher Alex Jones. Yes, I know, trigger words, Alex Jones, oh God. Yeah, so back in May of 2006, I wrote, today marks only the second time this author has heard local radio show host, parapolitical researcher, and documentary filmmaker Alex Jones admit to his lifelong history of prophetic or precognitive dreams. On July 25th, 2001, I and countless other Central Texas cable subscribers watched Alex warn of the impending false flag terror attacks against New York City, to be blamed on former CIA asset Osama bin Laden. Though Alex routinely avoids discussion of topics he considers new age or unprovable, preferring to stick to the facts, quote unquote, reported in mainstream news sources, he did in fact state in his June 2003 interview with former Marine sniper Colonel Craig Roberts that not only has he, Alex Jones, had premonitory visions and dreams, but that he specifically had a vision in the months before 9/11 that, combined with the mainstream news and behind-the-scenes intel he was receiving from insider sources, led him to make that dramatic July 25th broadcast that has become so infamous. Now, I'm sure most of you would immediately discount anything that Alex Jones says, but I found this newsworthy, and that's why I reported on it. And in fact, I would like to go ahead and play this clip. It's just under 3 minutes, and if you can't stand hearing Alex's voice, I completely understand. You might want to plug your ears right now.
Waging war on corruption. Alex Jones on the GCM radio network.
You know, I talk about bills, documents, news articles. I go out and cover things myself. I read legislation. And I don't have one of these shows where we talk about ghost stories and flying saucers. I talk about real things, but shaping my life, I've had experiences. And I'm not going to get any detail on this. Maybe someday. I mean, this is the first show I've done like this in the 9 years I've been doing this. But I, from the time I was a child, and only happens once every few years, will have a dream. I will tell people about the dream, vividly image it, and it will happen at a later date, a month, 6 months, a year later. And a lot of people ask, how did I know about 911? How did I get on the air? Never done this before. I said, call the White House, call Congress, tell them not to use bin Laden to attack New York as their patsy. And I had the evidence, I had the information, but frankly, folks, I never said this on the air. I had a dream where I saw the towers hit. Colonel Roberts, I didn't even share that with you in the car, but I just feel that I need to share this with people. Do you have any comments to what I've just said?
Well, you know, a lot of people are selected to receive premonitions. They're usually sensitive people, and you know, there's times when I developed kind of a sixth sense along that line. So yes, it's out there. I know in Vietnam a lot of guys developed that, what we call the jungle sense, where you knew ahead of time on a patrol at nighttime that down the trail was a tripwire or across the rice paddy was a sniper. You could just feel it. You just knew it. You didn't have to have information, but it happened ahead of time. You could see it in your mind's eye, so to speak. So that stuff does happen. A lot of people have dreams. My grandmother were that way. They were very receptive to dreams that that did come true later on. So this is something that's been reported through history. You know, like you say, it goes back thousands of years where people have had premonitions. They were called different things. They were called seers. They were called dreamers. They were called prophets sometimes, and even witches. But depending on what part of history you're in, the fact remains that I think God does give us information in a timely fashion to people to spread it out. We become the watchmen on the wall.
Well, I would think obviously too that the devil tries to do that with his minions, but he doesn't control the cosmos. He tries to manipulate events and will try to point his people in that direction.
Right. He's the guy that'll tell you the sky is red and you're supposed to believe it.
Okay. So back in 2002, my friend Russ Dowden, whose comment I just posted, started Austin Times, and I was editor, and we did some great material there. Russ continued that on after I left to found this here nonprofit Anomaly Archives. And one of the editorials, though, that I did for the Austin Times was all about September 11th. We really, the Austin Times paranormal parapolitical newspaper news magazine came out of the terror attacks of September 11th, and the editorial I wrote, I have long referenced for people who wanted to know my ideas about this. And over the years, I've kind of repackaged it. So in 2005, I turned the editorial into the first episode of my 9/11 podcast. That's right, folks. I was doing 2 or 3 different podcasts back in 2005, just as the phrase podcasting was coming about. Several years later, that audio podcast was aired by a friend on 91.7 FM Co-op radio here in Austin. And in 2015, I created the video I'm about to play. It's a montage using really cheesy video and image effects, but that used that same audio in preparation for a brief informal presentation that I did for the Anomaly Archives back in 2015 called Synchromistic 9/11, Deep Parapolitical and Esoteric Occult High Strangeness Surrounding September 11th. The first part of the audio deals with the very real and provable covert ops, deep state parapolitical elements of the 9/11 events. The second part deals with the precognitive parapsychological psychic ripple effects that were psychically sensed, P-S-E-N-S-E-D, sensed, before and during the events of that fateful day. So this is about a 10-minute video, folks. I may have some things to say on the other end of this before I end this, but I'm going to try to play this. Hopefully the audio will play for the entire video. And if it doesn't, please, somebody let me know. Here we go.
Waking up in a nightmare matrix. I awoke that morning much earlier than usual. I had a lot to do in preparation for the National UFO Conference that I was hosting later that week at the Alamo Draft House. I turned on the propaganda channel, CNN, as usual. I was greeted by the greedy image of America's wealth burning. The North Tower was smoking. I was shocked but not surprised. I went into the kitchen and started brewing some Java. Then I heard a scream from the TV. Oh my God, not another one! I ran back into the living room, just in time for the instant replay. A second plane had deliberately struck the South Tower. And then I knew. The war has begun. I'd just been a witness to America's greatest Reichstag event. I knew right then and there that America was totally screwed, that our freedoms were about to evaporate, that our Constitution was about to be eviscerated, that the ruling elite had finally decided to, bam, kick it up a notch. I sat down, dazed but not confused. I watched in horror and awe as the events continued to unfold. My phone began ringing off the wall. My network of parapolitical reporters were all checking in. We all knew what this meant. We'd all read the recently declassified Operation Northwoods documents, wherein the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1962 plotted to blow up American airlines, bomb Washington, and kill U.S. citizens, all as a pretext for invading Cuba. We all knew that the FBI had instigated the original 1993 attempt at taking down the World Trade Center. We all knew that Tim McVeigh wasn't the real bomber of the Oklahoma City Murrah Federal Building in 95. We all knew something was about to happen, as we had been warned by the likes of David Shippers and Alex Jones months before the attacks of 9/11. Not only that, but another conspiratorially minded acquaintance of mine had, in the weeks leading up to 9/11, warned me that, quote, something big, something earth-shattering will happen between September 17th and September 20th. He didn't know what, and he didn't know exactly when, but he did know. His warnings were based on various prophecies, as well as the general intel that was circulating in the weeks prior. Everybody knew. The CIA, the FBI, the Bush administration, Putin and the KGB, Israeli Mossad, the French, the Germans, the Brits. Everyone knew this was coming. Evidence goes back to the Philippines in 1995, so why the hell wasn't it stopped? And then the towers fell like the falling hammers of fascism that continue to fall each and every day since 9/11. The towers, seemingly for no reason whatsoever, came crashing down in the surreal maelstrom of death's debris. Among the thousands killed in the collapse was John P. O'Neill, a former deputy director of the FBI who had, just 2 weeks prior to the attacks, allegedly quit in disgust over the Bush administration's apparent obstruction of his investigations of certain al-Qaeda terrorist suspects. In the new book, Hidden Truth, from intelligence analysts Charles Broussard and Guillaume Dasky, O'Neill is purported to have told the authors, quote, "The main obstacles to investigate Islamic terrorism were U.S. oil corporate interests and the role played by Saudi Arabia in it." It's unclear what exactly happened to O'Neill that fateful day, but the reason he was in the World Trade Centers in the first place was his new post-FBI job was head of security at the World Trade Center. John O'Neill died the first day of his new job. The tragedy of that Tuesday's attacks weighed heavy on my mind. I was forced to completely cancel the 38th National UFO Conference I'd been working so hard towards the previous year. There was no way to continue with the event. The 20-plus speakers flying in from around the United States and Britain weren't going anywhere. The airports were all closed. Besides, how on earth would people be able to get caught up in such a subject as UFOs in the midst of so much suffering? The irony of this was a phone call we'd taken the previous week when I'd appeared on Jeff Contreras' Therefore I Am cable access show. How can you guys talk about such trivial matters as the existence of UFOs when there are paramilitary actions being perpetrated against innocent civilians around the world? To which we responded, that's a vital area of importance that we do cover. We don't research one topic within a vacuum, or words to that effect. Ripples in the collective unconscious. Within the next few days, a number of my friends would report the clairvoyant precognitive dreams they'd had prior to waking up to the terrors of that morning. One friend described a dream in which he was wandering around inside a skyscraper with a friend of his whom he associates with New York City because they met in film school there. They came to a room filled with mourning Middle Eastern people. He knew that whatever had happened, they were being falsely accused. A woman approached them and asked them to please leave as they wanted privacy while mourning. He then woke up and later learned of the attacks. Another friend had a dream of being atop a skyscraper and being forced to jump. He told himself that, if I believe the ground is water, then I won't be killed by the impact. He jumped and found himself submerged in the muddy bottom under the water, unable to get free, struggling to breathe. Neither of these friends consider themselves psychic. Another friend of mine does have a history of prophetic dreams, and this time was no different. On September 9th, he had a dream replete with imagery of the coming attacks. Buildings crumbling, dust clouds billowing down upon him, being covered in gray ash. He interprets that night's dreams to mean that both sides of these events, the Western world and the Middle Eastern world, are both conspiring to actualize the apocalypse of the Bible. He also sees the result in America for what it is, a fascist takeover. You can read his complete dream and interpret it yourself at elphis.net/DT for Dreamtime/JL sleepoftowers.htm. But perhaps the most impressive evidence for prophetic foreknowledge on the part of humanity as a whole was the massive deviation from randomness recorded by random event generators around the world before the first plane even hit the North Tower. For the past few years, a number of the world's leading parapsychologists have been collecting data around the world to determine if human attention, i.e. consciousness, affects randomness as created by state-of-the-art random number generators. A local host of one of the global REGs, Gary Hesseltine, spoke recently to the Austin Ions group at the Austin History Center. He spoke of the difficulties inherent in scientifically examining this startling data, but implores others to examine the data and help to create future experiments. You can look at all the data at noosphere.princeton.edu/terror.html. That's noosphere, noosphere.princeton.edu. There were many other strange prophecies associated with the September 11th attacks. Several different CD album covers produced before the attacks from America to Germany to Australia featured images of airplanes and or explosions associated with the World Trade Center skyline, as did a Middle Eastern calendar. Also, A Wisconsin preacher had a vision of the New York City skyline ablaze while visiting there on July 6, 2001. He published his vision online and in his print newsletter, which you can read at lasttrumpetministries.org. Also, a Lone Gunman TV episode aired months before 9/11, in which an airliner hijacked by remote control is used to try and fly the plane into the World Trade Centers. Do a search online. You can watch the episode. And Mark Allen has a Freudian dream September 7th. The dreamer is among a group of agents within a birth canal. The dream eventually switches to more literal references to the approaching tragedy. Quote, "Then I seem to be in another reality, another New York City that looks nothing like New York City. It is sunny in daytime. There is one point where I am trying to do something secret under this grassy highway underpass. I am trying to make these drawings on paper or something, and there is a sidewalk near me, and this line of school children, who all have really strange hairstyles, are walking along it. I don't want them to see me for some reason. Then I'm walking down the street, and suddenly I hear people screaming and saying stuff like, 'It's a really big accident,' and 'Oh my God,' and I run to the intersection and look down the street. The next intersection seems to drop off into the Hudson River, so I must be somewhere on the Upper East Side, and I see this gigantic concrete cone thing that has tiered steps like a pyramid, but it's a cone. It is spinning slowly, and as it does, I see a bunch of people getting kind of dumped onto it from above somewhere. Some of the people are dead already, and others are screaming and trying to get off the cone and getting crushed. It's really a major deal and really horrific. My adrenaline rushes, and I grab my cell phone and dial 911. As I am thinking a lot of people are probably calling 911 from their cells, but I'm going to call anyway. I'm wondering if 911 waits to hear a certain amount of calls on major disasters before they know if it's a hoax or not, because really, that is the first they would hear about it, and if it was just one call, it might be a prank. I am stuttering and choking on tears as I talk to the 911 operator because it's such an intense, scary moment. After I hang up the phone, after giving the operator the information, I look up and see the disaster is just getting worse. Whole 18-wheeler trucks and cars with people in them are getting dumped onto the cone, and everyone is getting crushed, and people are screaming, and it's awful. This dream is archived at Mark Allen's website, markallencam.com/dreamjournalsseptember2.html. So what's the point? Pay attention to your dreams. They are our most direct connection to the source and one another. You can share the dream environment with others. I know. I've experienced mutual dreaming and dream switching. More on that next time.
All right, folks. Thanks for sticking with us. Yeah, so it is not unusual for me every year to do something on the show if it's near this anniversary date. And, of course, I mean no disrespect to those whose lives were so terribly affected by those days' events. I feel like we're all living in an alternate reality time stream that was created on that fateful day. And there's been several major bifurcation events ever since, but that was our JFK for my generation, a real reality changing experience. And I don't necessarily hold the most conspiratorial view on it. At the very least, I think you can always quote Rahm Emanuel: "Never let a good disaster go to waste." I think the powers that be often just ride the wave like the rest of us, but sometimes they're engineering the waves with wave generators. Anyway, yeah. I have some weird ideas. I am a weird person. And in past shows, I had commented that I wasn't, there was a 9/11 mystery song that for over a decade after the first anniversary, I kept this song in my head that I'd heard on the anniversary of 9/11, like on 2002 or 2003 on probably Kill Radio in Los Angeles, that I really found powerful. And eventually, just last year, somebody finally found the source for me from Monument to Masses, Sharpshooter. Played that on last year's anniversary show. And on the 2013 anniversary show, I ended that show with a really powerful musical poem by Annie DeFranco called Self-Evident, which I'll try to put that in the show links notes too. But if you recall, if you remember Self-Evident by Annie DeFranco, it was it was written as a New Yorker in the wake of the September 11th attacks. And obviously a lefty liberal, she was lamenting the stolen election, stolen by Bush Jr., from Al Gore. That was the narrative then. And I, tended to agree with it then. I don't necessarily agree with recent years' pronouncements of steals of elections, but we all know that there's almost always attempts at shenanigans one way or the other. And that's why we should guard our democracy as best we can. You didn't come here to hear any of this. And you probably didn't come to hear this very last thing, but, I've mentioned, and this is not related to anything we've been talking about, and I'm just going to end the show on this weird note, but there has been so much clickbait out there about a supposed serial killer here in Austin, the Rainy Street slasher, or Rainy Street Ripper, excuse me, and all the bodies that keep turning up in Lady Bird Lake, Town Lake, the reservoir, the dammed up puddle of water that bifurcates North Austin from South Austin, downtown Austin from South Austin. And that history, as I think I mentioned in a previous episode, goes way further back than I realized. There's always been people falling into this lake and drowning. It's just a recurring thing. And now that we've got drinking districts that abut it, that lead right to it, is it any wonder? But I was going to bring this. So there was 2 deaths recently that the Austin Police Department were bringing to the public's attention, that they were saying they weren't sure were connected, but they were beginning to suspect might be connected. And I only just today came across this from mid last month, August 16, 2024, over at statesman.com. Texas serial killer on the loose as police use DNA to link suspect deaths of 2 women. One of these happened, I believe, earlier this year, and the other occurred 6 years prior. And they're saying they have DNA evidence linking the 2. Now, Austin has its own controversial history of not processing DNA evidence like, rape kits properly or in a timely fashion. And there are, of course, many crime labs around the country that have gotten into trouble for just not doing really good work or not doing it quick enough to serve the public interest. But this is concerning. This doesn't even necessarily, does not, as far as I can tell, touch on these Town Lake deaths. These are, which have been mostly men, where in this case it's 2 women who unsurprisingly, sadly, were both sexually assaulted and then murdered. And it reminds me of something else I heard just recently, which is about this whole idea of long haul truckers being serial killers, and that there's this massive number of unsolved murders across the country that supposedly the FBI has linked to the probability of there being a network of long-haul truckers that are using their transitory jobs as a way to hide these crimes. That's some dark stuff, folks. All of this, I would just say, keep top eye open and be careful out there. Love and protect those you love. And yeah, Russ, hard to believe it's been 23 years. Yeah. It's crazy. Well, with that, I just need to go say good night. Y'all be safe. Take care of each other. And we'll be back soon. Next week's show will probably be pre-recorded as it's the anniversary of my dad's death, and I don't know that I want to do a live show next week. So happy, joy. Everybody, be careful. Take care. Love you.
Who was it? Who could it possibly be? Was it? Oh, I don't know. Say it.